When did you first come to the church?
We assumed the pastorate the first Sunday of November in 1957. Dr. Harold Fisher had been contacted to have someone from the college take the pastorate in that Ira Pratt had resigned and left, and so he arranged that I would be invited down there to speak on a Sunday morning, and the leadership of the church asked me to become their pastor in the first Sunday in November 1957, and then they invited me back that night, and we probably had about 15-20 people that were there in services that morning, and we're meeting in the old Grange building down at 15th and Balboa in Newport Beach.
This is 2 blocks from the beach.
Yeah, well, it was right on the beach. You could walk out of the building and the ships were right out behind there, the docks. It was right on the beach, 15th and Balboa.
When did you move from there to the 15th and Monrovia location?
We moved, I think it was in 57, 58. It was either late 58 or early 59 that we moved to the 15th and Monrovia. Yeah.
How many people were in the congregation at that time?
We probably had, when we moved, we probably had about 75, between 60 and 75 people, and a lot of those were Bible college students and their families that were attending there. And then when the Budge clan came from Texas, the whole clan came to our church and made that their home church. And Daddy Budge was very active in the building of that A-frame building that we put up afterward. But we remodeled that triplex. We moved in for a short period of time into one of the apartments of the triplex and then remodeled that triplex with all volunteer help. Just the cost of materials. Hazel Toombs was an old-time member, one of the outside of the Bible College members from Corona Del Mar. And Hazel Toombs paid for her painter, Alex, to do all the painting on that. The old building, the first building, the triplex that we remodeled. And we had probably room, I don't know, you've been in the building, probably room for around 125 with that little side room there in the old building.
So this was after the move of STC to the present location?
Oh yeah. I was in my junior year at SCC. I was in school there and was men's missionary curator at the college, and was men's missionary curator and a pastor, and worked 4 hours a day at another job that year.
What, in the building of the A-frame, how did this all transpire?
Well, it was evident that we needed bigger facilities. The congregation was growing, and it was evident that we needed larger facilities. And so we contacted Joe Colombo to draw plans up for it and make us a master plan, which we got, I think we were in Orange County at that time. And we made arrangements for a loan through Security Pacific Bank, I believe, and they agreed to finance the whole thing. And Colombo drew up the plans, and then his friend, George Ludwig, was the contractor on that. But here again, we provided a lot of volunteer labor. Daddy Budge did all the cement work, all the sidewalks, all the floor, did all that cement work. And then we had one of our members that was in the Marines, Del Toro, that came to the Regulated Church, and he took a 2-week furlough and gave 2 full weeks of his time. They worked 12-hour days. And so we contracted at a much less amount than it would cost us to have it all contracted.
And how did, what do you remember about the dedication of that new building?
We had a dedication day, and Bill Robertson was the dedication speaker. And Bill Robertson drove all over town trying to find it. He got lost. And I ended up preaching the dedication sermon that day. And he arrived just about the time I was finishing, so he came in with a few statements at the end of the dedication meeting. And that was the first building. Then the second building, I don't know who was the dedication speaker. I think we had 2 or 3. And we met in the old building and walked across to the A-frame building. And we've got some pictures yet in our files of the crowd that was walking across there to the new building that morning. I think we had 4 or 5 speakers, in fact, for the dedication of the new building. As I remember, that whole property down there, back in the 50s, the church paid around $25,000 for that acre and a half of property back in the 50s. And
The reason why I asked that question is because we have that. I have that on video,
oh yeah,
when we're walking across.
oh yeah.
I've seen it several times.
Uh-huh.
What kind of involvement did in missions did the church have at that time?
Well, the year we took the church, we just had a handful of people, and it was missionary minded, and we were giving to missions, but not that much. We were there 5 years. We pastored the church just over 5 years, and in that 5 years, well, when we got moved into the A-frame building, we had our first missionary convention. In fact, I think we had it before we moved into the A-frame building, and we had our first missionary convention, had 3 missionaries, and with the idea in mind, we were going to contribute to support of those 3 missionaries on the field. And from there, we just built the missions ministry, and the 5th year we were there, the missionary budget, the money that was going to missions, was more than the total gross budget of the church, the total amount of money that came in through the church the first year. The 5th year was over that just for missions. So we saw it grow tremendously. And I think that was one of the reasons why the church grew, was that we really believed in missions, preached missions, and were devoted to missions.
From day one.
Yeah.
What, let's see, what was the next thing I'm going to ask? Was there something else I was going to say there? But, what's your favorite memory of this period of time in the church?
Probably the favorite memory is when we dedicated that first little building that seated about 125 people. It was a great day, and we didn't have the building finished yet, but everybody was so thrilled that we had finally had a place that we could go into of our own, and that we didn't have to go in and clean up the beer cans and wipe the piano off, the liquor and sticky stuff off of the piano, and clean it up so we could have church on Sunday morning in that Grange building. They'd have parties there on Saturday night, and so we'd go in and pray over the premises on Sunday morning before we had services, and clean it up so that we could have church on Sunday. It was just a thrill to have a place that we could meet of our own. And that dedication day that we moved into that building was a great memory, it really was. Yeah.
Is there anyone that you can remember that came to the Lord during this period of time that is making a difference in the world today, or is going on to be something that God is really using?
Not right offhand. A number of people that attended there went on, became pastors and evangelists, because we had a good representation of the student body at Southern California College. We'd been very active on the campus. As I mentioned, I was the junior class president and the men's missionary curator, and so we were quite active on campus. And a number of them went on, became pastors that attended there and helped in the building, both of the building projects that we went through there in 5 years. Yeah.
Were you pastor when Ray White came to the Lord?
Yes. Ray was, in fact, Ray was on the board of deacons when I took the church. I think Ray White and Harold Hunt, and Ray has certainly made his mark in the world today in Christian education. God has really used him in that capacity. Yeah.
How many people did you have on your board at the early days?
I think we probably had about 5, as I remember, maximum, that served in that capacity. There's Harold Hunt, Ray White, And Daddy Budge came on when they moved from Texas. Trying to think of all of them. Ron Whidden was on, and those I remember right offhand that were served there on the board.
What are your early memories and recollections of early Costa Mesa in those days?
Well, when we came to Costa Mesa, we'd come in the fall of 55, and we took the church 2 years later in 57, and they called it Goat Hill. The population was around 17,000 in Costa Mesa, and Harbor Boulevard, out through Harbor Boulevard by Orange Coast College, they had cow pastures out there, and the project of the college, Orange Coast College, they had bulls and animals out there in the pastures along Harbor Boulevard, and it certainly has changed over the years. Yeah.
A lot of orange groves.
Yeah.
From your vantage point now, what would you like to, as a message or a word of inspiration to the present congregation, what would you like to tell them?
Well, let me give that a little thought.
Okay. How large was while you're that pondering around in your head, how large was the church at the time that you left?
Well, the building was filled on Sunday morning. In fact, the building and the balcony was filled when we left in 62. October of 62 when we left, the building was being packed out. And we had the choice of going to another service or getting a bigger facility when we left in 62. I feel we had a good ministry there. Yeah.
I do too. Anything else that you'd like to say?
Well, getting back to the message of today, I think it would be to maintain a world vision, a vision for the world. I think every local church should have a vision for the world and be reaching actively with their own people into as many countries of the world as possible, taking those people to the mission field, giving them a first-hand glimpse of what God is doing in other countries of the world, such as Latin America, Brazil, the Philippines, the Orient, what God is doing in different parts of the world. There's great revival going on in the world. In fact, we were 16 days in the Philippines just recently, and we began to go back and calculate how many people had come to the Lord. We take our own people with us there. If they can provide their airplane ticket, that's all they have to provide. And we take them with us to the mission field. And we estimated that there were 7,000 decisions made for Christ in 16 days of mission there. And those people that went with us will never be the same. They got a vision. They got a vision of the poverty of the third world countries, the little that they have, yet the joy that Christians live in. And they're happy to serve God with very little or nothing, and their families practically starving. There are estimated over 45,000 little kids running the streets of Manila today, and a lady has offered to donate us land to build a children's home there and to begin to take some of these little kids. They're used for prostitution. A lot of them are running in areas of the streets with no clothes on, stark naked, and to bring them into a Christian children's home and establish them in the gospel and send them out as missionaries to the world. And this is kind of the world vision. With a Philippine friend of mine, we have founded Philippine Missions, and we do active campaigns there every year, 3 to 4 crusades there a year. And it's just fantastic results that we're getting from that ministry. I think every local church should really have a world vision and a mission field that you're really tied to, not where the missionaries come back and report to you, but where you take your people. And it's amazing how many people can afford a round trip plane ticket and just for that, invite them to go along to the mission field and let the congregation catch a glimpse of what God's doing there. And it revives the home church. It really does.
It's one of my dreams. Anything else about the early days you'd like to say at all?
Well, it was hard. It was challenging. But we sought in those 5 years that we were there to lay a foundation for a church that would stand till Jesus comes, till the trumpet sounds. We went through some important stages, I believe, in moving it to its permanent location and trying to establish not only a geographical location that became known as the local church, but we tried to establish a balanced church that would be balanced and have a worldview and understand they had a mission and an obligation to preach the gospel to the whole world. For every Christian should have that kind of a vision, to reach into the world with the gospel.
Great. Getting close to 11 o'clock. Richard.
First of all, if I recall correctly, I was aware of the church people. They were very warm to us during our 2 or 3 short revivals there. And I think the most remarkable thing about the physical part of it was we used to call it the head-knocking church. You couldn't use the outside aisles without bending way over, and me being 6'3", I had to really humble myself before I got to the platform. Of course, it being in California and me being somewhat ill, and in fact proved to be very ill, we thought maybe by coming that our health would improve.
About Costa Mesa, I don't know what your earliest recollection is of Costa Mesa, but what do you remember about the area?
It was a pioneer town. It was a town where you could buy a home for $9,000. The median in the middle of the town had palm trees, several palm trees. Peaceful, little, early, California. Maybe hamlet. I don't know that you could even call it a city. Let's say village.
Good. When you came, do you know approximately the size of the church?
How many do you think, dear, was a member? She's the statistician of the
I
family.
think we had about 60. That includes the children as well.
Children are important.
Yes, they are. And we've had quite a ministry with the children there.
Okay. I'll ask the question, we'll see what happens. It's, what kind of involvement did the church have in missions at this stage in the town?
As far as I know, we were more or less in the business of survival. I know one thing, we did not cut anybody back or off the roll. I think we added 1 or 2, but it was most insignificant. I don't think we did it any damage. If we did any good, it was a little good.
And any special memories that of people that really served the Lord in a great way while you were there, or anything of this nature?
I would say the Hunts were very influential. You remember?
Yes, I remember the Hunts. He was then a CPA, and he at that time too had a franchise on a meat sales business, and he was a fine representative of the church. And then, of course, the Widdens were representative of the church. We were very proud of them, the way they would be seated in the front row with their 4 children. And Betty Price, I think, played the piano. Myrtle Widden played the organ. There was a gentleman who was a mechanic who used to sit in the back and take care of the cars of the missionaries. I think that's about all that I can remember.
That's Howie Hines.
Yes, that was his name.
Your greatest impact is to what group of people in the church at your time?
I think this is where we enter a bit of ambivalence. I created a situation which I could not correct, and I doubt if I could correct it today. I particularly remember we began with about 5 students from the Southern California College, which is my alma mater, and to my supreme honor, awarded me first alumnus from 60 years of graduates. I'll never get over that shock. That group grew from 5, the student group from Southern California College, and I think also the Pacific College, from 5 to maybe 50 students, and that would be a top number. And as I would minister, they would show a tremendous amount of interest. And I found myself ministering to them, and they were not supporting me. And the church didn't seem to be quite as much enthralled with what I was saying as the students were. But I think the main thing was the increased interest of the students from 2 or possibly 3 colleges. Maybe Azusa was in there, I do not know. Wonderful students. Some of them were, and I mentioned the attorney is on the board now. You might help me with him. You mentioned that name. And then another man who joined the Presbyterian Church, came back to our area and ministered, and was an evening teacher from the Southern California College. His name escapes me presently. I'm sorry.
Anything special you'd like to say to the present congregation?
Oh my, they've had enough sermons, I'm sure. Well, I said maybe to encapsulate it, it would be hats off to the past and coats off to the future. I would say this, that the few seeds which we planted certainly must have been potent for George Wood and those who helped him to produce such a magnificent church in its present state. He must have put in a lot of good fertilizer into that water, because one plants and one waters, and of course God gives the increase. May I say this, we are experiencing somewhat of a high. Our ministry for the last 2 or 3 years after retirement has been the selling of our tapes and our books. And just the last order, which was fulfilled, an $80 order of our books, I was all out of any of the 4. I had nothing left, only for what I thought posterity. And a publisher called me this morning, and he asked for the privilege of publishing all 4 of our books. He is fully financed by the Christian Athletic Association of America, and they publish 10,000 books at a time, which means 4,000 of our little books will be on the market to be given to the athletes of America. That compliments me. I don't think a man is through as long as young people love him.
For sure. How long have you been in the ministry?
I would say that I was called to the ministry when I was 18 years of age. And we began the ministry between Bethel and Central Bible College, Bethel Bible College of New Jersey, and Central Bible College, in a country school when I was 19. I was student pastor. I have now attained age 80 as of last July 25th. So that figures out nearly 60 years, I guess, close to it. And we have had, my obsession has been to minister. Somebody asked me what my hobby was, and apart from photography, I think maybe runs second to it, I've been obsessed with just ministry through 40 nations of the world to 500 places we have been fortunate to minister.
Oh, good. And your wife is ordained also?
Yes, sir.
And how long have you been in the ministry?
Since 1930. I was a girl evangelist before I married him. We were married in 31. And since then, we've had a combined ministry.
There was a church already for me. She had pioneered in a Lutheran church, and the other church was already for me to come and help the pastor. So I was assistant pastor for a while.
I might say, when he came right out of Bible school, and of course he was happy to get there.
No money.
And as soon as we were married, which was a couple of weeks, I turned over my entire bank account to him, which was $8, and we started our ministry on that.
We felt led of the Lord to enter evangelism, and the church there bought us a $25 Model T Ford, and that was our very ordinary beginning. We prayed every mile of the way. Yeah.
But God built Peter with a fish.
Oh, yes. Yes.
He is the ordinary things to build, doesn't he?
Yes. Yeah, and the one nice thing about that story is the Lord said, let down the nets. And Peter was amazed when so many fish came into the one net that he let down. And he wondered why it was breaking. And he learned that it was because Jesus said, let down the nets, and he only let down the net, which leads us to believe maybe that partial obedience might be disobedience.
It may not accomplish the whole thing.
That's right, brother. Brother Huntley, you have complimented us, and the church which you represent has complimented us. And every mention, every time we have seen your articles, various publications, we have rejoiced with you. And we're glad. Every other church we pastored, I think we were either the first pastors or never more than the third over a period of 40 years, and I notice we're the 7th of 15 in your churches, so right in the middle, yeah.
Okay, anything else you'd like to say before we turn this
Oh my, you've done such a magnificent job. How can or how can we who did so little give any advice to those who've done so much? Thank you for coming. We're proud of you, very proud of you.
little is not a word in the vocabulary of God.
Thank you.
Because if you have done what God has told you to do, it's the greatest thing in the world.
Thank you, Brother Huntley. Thanks so much for coming.
speak now or forever hold your peace.
Speak, means to
Okay. What year, or approximate year, did you come into the church?
I think about 63 or 64. I think it was 63, but it may have been 64, but right around that time.
What was the church like at that time when you come?
It was certainly a lot smaller than it is now. I was at Newport, Newport Glad Tidings. I'll get that right here in a minute. Couldn't remember what the name of it was. But it was probably ran, I think, 75 to 100 when we started going there. Maybe a little smaller than that, maybe a little larger, but I think somewhere's in that neighborhood. Tom Benvenuti was a pastor, and it was an on-fire church. A lot of Tom was a fiery preacher, and the church was a fiery church.
And what do you remember about Costa Mesa and the surrounding areas there when you were at that time while you were there?
There was space. You could see vacant land on occasion, quite a lot of vacant land. There was a lot of distance between Costa Mesa and Santa Ana and Huntington Beach and all these other places. Of course, today it's not a lot of distance at all. I mean, everything's jammed. But it was a lot more laid back, I think, in those earlier days than it is today. And it was a great place to be. This maybe is off of that subject a little bit, but Costa Mesa and Newport Beach, that area was a place where I think Jack Sampier developed a little bit in that area.
Do you remember anyone who came to the Lord in the early days to making a difference in the world today? Pastor, teacher?
John, I do, and I don't know that he came to the Lord then, but I remember some struggles in those days, and there's a fellow named John Huntley, and I have been just enthralled to see what God has done in your life in the area that you and your family have taken. But I remember some struggles in those days. I'm sure you do too. And, but I really, when you asked me that question, I thought to myself, I think you were saved when you came there, so I don't think that was the issue. But just the Lord was moving you in some directions, I think, and you weren't sure. But it's been fantastic to see what's happened there.
I'm going to ask you to repeat that. Repeat the whole thing. Only imagine John is somebody else, or speaking to me. Okay?
Okay.
So that John isn't the interviewer, but somebody else is. Okay, John is a member now of the church. He's not sitting beside us, okay?
Okay.
Repeat the whole statement just like you did.
May be
okay?
tough,
In other
okay.
words, yeah, no, you know that.
Right,
just
right.
So that because the audience does not know that John's here.
Right, okay.
So they don't react to John, but the statement, if indeed we do use it, is an awesome statement, but we got to get away from John's
Yeah. presence
in the room.
Right,
okay?
I understand.
So,
Okay.
repeat the question again and stick to your name.
John Huntley, I think, probably is the fellow that would stand out in my mind. It's been really awesome to see what God has done in his life, and I remember some struggles in those early days. I think John was saved when he came to the church there, but I remember many times conversations with him and some real struggles that he and his family were going through. But to see what God has done there has really enthralled me. I've been overjoyed at it.
Thank you.
What kind of involvement did the church have in missions at the time you came?
Very heavy. The church is, from the time that I was there anyway, has always had a very heavy involvement in missions. Tom Benvenuti was very heavy on missions. George Wood, very heavy on missions. And I think the church had a missions heart. I would attribute probably where the church is today as its missions heart. I learned a lot about missions there. Today I have a heart for missions, and part of that results from those early days.
What was your involvement in the church while you were there?
I think I came to the church to work in the education department. I was Sunday school superintendent or something in the early days. I can't remember exactly. I think it was Sunday school superintendent, and taught the high school class, I think, high school or college, I don't remember which, maybe both at different times. Later taught the adult class, which was my favorite. The older they were, the better I liked them, actually. And, I actually became eventually assistant pastor at the church, and then served, after Tom Benvenuti left, served as chairman of the board when George Wood was called to the church.
The church just having gone through a recent transition, and you probably know some of the details of that transition. How would you compare the two transitions?
That's a good question. And an interesting question, because from what I know of the two transitions, they were a lot alike in the way that God called the new pastor there. That is, both of them were people who were satisfied where they were, didn't want to leave. And yet at the same time, the church felt that that was the man God wanted. And so that was really interesting to me to see that, the way that worked out in both cases. And of course, the fact that they kind of look alike is interesting too. But it was the method, I think, of the call. The church searched diligently its own heart. I don't know how many people that was interviewed by this last time. And the first time, I don't think anybody was interviewed other than George Wood. I don't recall that anybody tried out for the church other than George Wood. That there may have been, but I don't recall anybody. Once we decided in our hearts that that was the man, I don't think we looked at anybody else, either before or after, really, for that matter. It was the pressure of, yeah, right. But, you know, the way that I was just, in fact, I have the tapes of the installation. And then I have the tapes of that evening service as well. But that installation service was, of Jim, was just, it was great. I mean, it was I don't think I've ever heard a service any better than that. Certainly no installation any better than that. And it was great that really the former pastor was there to do that. I thought that was great. Even though he was there as a district official, I thought it was fantastic that it was the former pastor, because it gave to that some continuity that would not have been there otherwise, you know.
Yeah, it was the passing of the baton.
Yeah, yeah. And I just thought it was really, really great. And, but God's people need to learn anyway to not be so tied to one man that the changes are devastating, you know. But we do that. We like people, we get used to them.
It could have been devastating.
Yeah.
What is, you run?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any memory that sticks out in your mind of the church while you were there?
Oh, I have a lot of memories that stick out in my mind of the church while I was there. Probably a lot of them go to watching people come in and changes that were made in a lot of lives, including my own. Of course, I raised my family in its early years up to my son's age 5, I believe. So my daughter would have been about 6, Jack and Karen. But those years with them there, probably times around the altar, though, stand out more than anything else in my mind. I mean, times when the Spirit of God was just present, you know, in a unique, and every time the Lord's there, it seems to be unique, though, in some way. But those would stand out more than anything else, those times.
When you come to the church, what attracted you to Blood Daddies?
I think it's people. It was a friendly church. it seemed to me that all of the people were committed to the church. You know, I don't recall any dissension much in that church at all. Now, I'm certain there probably was any group of people that there is, but I don't recall any. I was certainly never involved in any, or party to any that I was aware of anyway. You know. But I think it's people, and it's pastor. And I like to certainly. Tom Benvenuti was like a father to me in a spiritual sense, and so I really liked him. And of course, George following him, I couldn't have found a better fellow either to be a role model either than George's commitment. And they were totally different pastors, but nonetheless, I think each of them very vital to the church's growth. And the pastors before I really did not know. Except I knew Bill Schultz a little bit, but not well. But they were that vital, I think, in their time to the church's growth. Very important that they be where they were.
How did the transition work out when George could not come right away? How did that all work out? Did you find an interim pastor and all this kind of thing?
That.
And what kind of problems were involved?
Yeah. I was so naive at the time, I'm not sure I recognized problems when I saw them. I'm still kind of that way today. I just trust the Lord's going to work everything out, and I find out He always does. So I don't view problems in the same sense that most people view them probably. Certainly there were problems. I think we flew George out here every other week, if I recall, that he would fly out. I believe that that Bill Hunter, I think was it Bill Hunter? Alex Hunter, yes. Did most of the ministering in between time, if I recall, although there may have been others as well. The church went smoothly, I thought. I don't recall ripples or problems. Again, I kind of am an ostrich and I stick my head in the sand and assume everything's okay. But I don't recall that we had any major problems at all. It was a beautiful transition. I don't recall people leaving the church during that time. There may have been some, but I don't really recall that any did. And I thought it went very, very smoothly. Worked out great.
If you had one thing that you could say to the church today for the future, what do you think you would say to them?
Trust God. Take literally the promise in 8:28, in everything God is working for good to those who love Him and are called according to His purpose. Take that literally, so that even the things that you consider bad, remember God sees them as good. He will make them good. And I think if you take that attitude, you find that it really works. And that calms the soul and solves a lot of my problems anyway.
Do you think of anything that your congregation would be interested in that I didn't ask? Building programs.
Yeah, maybe the building programs. They were great. When we built the education unit, that was a phenomenal experience, because most of that was done by the congregation. Dave Botzenhart, if I recall, kind of headed up that, and that was fun times. A lot of hard work, but a lot of fun and fellowship. And a lot of spiritual growth took place on pounded nails on the roof of that place or elsewhere. That was certainly a good time. I think congregations miss it when somebody else builds the whole church. You need to be involved. Pound a few nails, do something. But that was a great time. I really can't. I'm certain a lot of things go through my mind. A lot of people go through my mind that I've not seen, like know where they are. You know. I'm trying to think of the name of the. She and her mother. In fact, there were two sisters and a mother that attended. No. Redheaded.
Yeah, I know who you mean.
Love to know what happened to them. I thought some great prayer warriors. Spent a lot of time praying for me, I know. And, but people like that, you know, it's interesting who has an impact on your life. It's not always the people who are up front. Many times it's the people who are behind, whose lives you watch that have a phenomenal impact on your life. And I think that was true of a lot of people in the early days, in my early days there anyway. I look back in those days as the very best times of my life. The friends I made at that church are the closest friends I have today. And that really is true, except for one or two people who are, I think the closest friends I have today are still those people. Now, a lot of them aren't there anymore, but they're still people who came from the early days of Glad Tidings. They're still the best friends that I have. And I think that'll always be the case. My heart always is warm in that area. Love going back there. And if I could point to one time in my life when I think I grew and matured spiritually, that's the time of my life that happened, was those days at Glad Tidings. Both, under both pastors, in fact. Both of them played a very important part in my life. And the people played a very important part in my life.
Do you remember anything about First Assembly when you were there? What was going on there?
Not really. Of course, Pastor Cronick was there at that time. I think Phillips came just before I left. He was teaching at SCC, and he took the church, and so I remember him fairly well, but not really much about the church because I was not involved with the church at that time. I just knew him mainly because of association with SCC. But I don't recall too much about First Assembly at all.
Great.
No, but I mean, for the 8 or 9, how long is your show going to be? An hour?
No, the total videos are going to be 12 to 15 minutes.
Gee,
But you see, we're just going to be in and out with different people.
I understand.
Tell the entire story. And most of the time, or a lot of the time, it'll be pictures of what you're talking about.
Mhm.
It'll be there.
It's too bad you couldn't get some pictures of the first church that they opened up at the beach site. They opened the first storefront down
We
there.
have one picture.
No kidding. That's great. That's great. Yeah, I remember them telling me the sacrifice that they had. Boy, John, you'll never know the battle we had to keep that Agape Inn going over there.
Well, I forgot all about the, you know, nobody was mentioning the Agape Inn.
I mean, I had 2 of my board members that fought me tooth and nail. I used to drive up to
This was called the Agape Inn.
yeah, the Agape Inn. Do you know Paul Goad, missionary? He was saved in the Agape Inn. He's a missionary today. So I used to go up every Friday and Saturday myself and load my car up at this cafe. Not these trucks that drive around. They bring their sandwiches up and throw them away over the weekend. And I would pick them up on Friday. I had different drivers that gave them to me Friday and Saturday and bring them down there. And the girls would make coffee and punch, and they go out and bring the guys in. It was just great. It's some of the great highlights, really. Right.
This was during the hippie period.
Yeah. But, you know, we had a reunion. I don't know if you heard of it. Were you there at our reunion? About 150 showed up of our congregation. You know, were you there that day? I mean, wasn't that amazing? I mean, I'm still, I mean, I'm amazed. That day, it seemed like it was so far away and yet so near, you know? But the inspiration that, the anointing of God's Spirit that we felt there in those years was great. And look at the guys in the ministry from there. Jack St. Pierre, Pat Devine, John York, Rick Sailors, Paul Lemons, Phil Robinette, Dan Murray. Remember Dan Murray? He has a church down in Hemet right now. And my daughter, she's on radio daily, Monday through Friday on KFSC, 5 o'clock every morning. Isn't that amazing? So it's been very rewarding. I'm 71 years old, John. And I'm still on the go. I'm on the go 60, 70, 80 hours a day. I get up early in the morning. I'm up at 3, 4 o'clock to get my messages, prepare them. And then Saturday morning we go in the studio with my wife, and she is my disc jockey. And we tape 5 or 6 messages for my broadcast every Saturday morning. But I'm fired up, boy. God is doing something in my life that it just amazes me. I preached to more people, John, in 1 week than I preached in 40 years of my ministry. 1 week. I'm on 2 stations that covers 2/3 of the United States. Way down into Mexico, I cover Canada, and down into South America. I mean, it's amazing how God has opened these doors for me. I'm on 21 stations. It's amazing.
This Agape Inn, where was it,
And-
what building was it in?
And that remember that house was right behind there that we used for Sunday school rooms? Right in there. I went down there the other day. I was sick. They tore that whole thing out of the apartments down there. John, why didn't they keep both of those churches and left them open? Why? Why didn't they do it? Property that's worth millions of dollars today. And all we've got is 2 churches in this area. How's Harbor doing? You know? Is it? It's great.
Well, what was it like in the early days of Glad Tidings?
When I first came there, it was amazing. In fact, the first Sunday morning that I was there wasn't enough money, and exactly $125 came in that day to pay my salary. And it was amazing how God began to move. I came to Newport Beach because God called me there. And from the first service that we were there, it was amazing how God began to bless until the 6.5 or 7 years that we were there. In fact, the last Sunday morning that I was there, the church was completely packed out. We were at the time negotiating with the First Assembly to amalgamate both churches, and God was blessing. But God spoke to me that Sunday morning that I was to resign. And I remember a week later that the church wanted us back and called me and asked me to reconsider. And I spent a sleepless night, and I still had to say no. My time was up. God called me, and when God said I was through, I was through. But the inspiration of God's Spirit was amazing. There was an aurora. There, the move of God, that God began to move in a remarkable way. And even today, we had this reunion here just a few years ago where 150 of our people showed up from all over Northern California down into San Diego, and also from Arizona. They came from all over, and it was a great day, a great day.
Do you know approximately how many people might have been there, how large the church was?
I would say maybe 20, 25, or 30 people, 40 people at the most when I came there. That's all there were.
And of course, the A-frame was packed out when you left.
Yes. In fact, we were planning, I was going to call a board meeting and have 2 services in the following Sundays. But it was amazing how all of a sudden God spoke to my heart to leave, and that was it. So it just worked out beautiful for everything.
You had a good choir in those days.
This is one of the epics right here. I don't know if you can see this on camera, but this is one of the epics. They were anointed with the mighty Spirit of God, about 50 or 60 in our choir. And I think this is the last one of the breed that we had. I think the first one was 500, between 500 and 1,000 of them, and we sold them all at a very low price. But this was the epic, one of the epics. And also the Agape Inn that we had there. In those days, John, I don't know if you remember or not how the hippies had control all of Long Beach down into Newport Beach and Huntington Beach. And we started an Agape Inn, where I would go out and pick up sandwiches every Friday and Saturday and bring them down, and the kids would go out to the beaches and bring these hippies in. And we'd preach to them. They'd sing and preach to them, testify to them, and feed them. And it was amazing how many began to get saved and filled with the Spirit of God. It was a tremendous outreach of the church.
One of those guys that came at that time.
Yeah, Paul Goad got saved there in the Agapian. Now, when the church was purchased, they sacrificed. They bought this home and they had the services there before they built the A-frame. Trying to think of his name now, that built the A-frame church. He's done a great job for the Lord. But anyway, they had the services there. Then they built the A-frame. And this was used as a Sunday school room and offices, etc. And we used that for the Agape and fixed it up with different lights and all, where they felt comfortable when they came in. They probably thought, well, this is a hippie place with all these lights shining around here. But then they began to sing, and the glory of God came down. I don't know how many got saved, but Paul Goad got saved in that Agapian and is a missionary today for the glory of the Lord. Yes, we did. You do? Isn't that great? So that was one of the great highlights. But the greatest highlight, John, was the inspiration of God's Word. There wasn't a Sunday morning where souls were at the altar, and Sunday night that God began to move and do a great work for the Lord. In fact, you're not going to ask me that question, but I'll bring it out anyway. You're going to ask me how. Look at the different ones. I wrote them down. I couldn't memorize these with my 71-year-old mind today. But Jack St. Pierre is pastoring in San Diego. Pat Devine, who is now a missionary today. John York. Rick Sailors, who's down in San Diego doing a great work for God. Paul Lemons, I believe, is one of our presbyters up in Fresno. And Phil Robinette teaches a school here, doesn't he? I think he was our assistant pastor at one time. And then Dan Murray, who is pastoring today. So it's been a very fruitful. These are some of the ones that, when I got together with my daughter Sherry, in fact, Sherry Benvenuti, who was attending school here, just graduated with a BA degree. She's entering now for her master's. She's on radio today, 5 days a week at KFSG, which we're thrilled about. So that was a tremendous ministry that we had here at Glad Tidings Assembly of God Church.
And what kind of involvement in worldwide missions?
We had a missionary meeting every year. I think we ran 5 days, Monday through Sunday. And I think we raised, John, if I'm not mistaken, don't quote me, from $15,000 to $25,000 a year to support missionaries on the field. In fact, two that I know that we supported at that time were the Turnbulls, both Turnbull brothers. Dan Anglin came to our church. I married Dan Anglin and his wife, and today they're missionaries, and I understand his son here is going to school. So it's a thrill to see what God has done.
If you had to pull out a favorite memory from there, what would you pull out?
I'll never forget one girl came to church with a drunken father on a Sunday morning, and she got saved. And then she came back the next Sunday morning, and she was wearing a real short dress. And you know, during those days, 21 years ago, very short dress. And one of the men complained about it. And I, kind of curious, I went to her, she came to me, and she apologized to me for wearing that short dress. She said that when she gave her heart to the Lord, that she went home and told her dad to testify to him. He got awful irate and told her that she couldn't go to church unless she wore that dress. So she wore that dress. She had been filled with the Spirit of God, that she would rather come in that dress and be a spectacle to the whole congregation at the time. But when I let them know about it, God really blessed the people. That was one of the highlights of the whole thing. But the highlight of the whole thing is this, John. There was an inspiration. I don't know if you've ever realized this or not, that the whole New Testament is Pentecostal. Now, if E.S. Williams was alive today, he would say that the first church in Jerusalem should be called the First Pentecostal Assembly of God Church in Jerusalem. Every apostle, every teacher, every preacher, every church were Pentecostal except one church in Acts 19. It was called the church at Ephesus. When Paul went there, he said, "Whatever you see since you believed," he said, "the baptism of John. He said, "What do you mean?" He laid hands on them and they received the baptism of the Holy Spirit. John, it's Pentecost. I was called out of Catholicism, out of darkness, sinful life. I never went to church to hear the gospel, but I saw the gospel in my family's life. I saw it with my own eyes. It's like the Bible says, I've seen, I've heard, and I've tasted, and this is what we offer you, the same fellowship John, I was called out of darkness. And when God saved me and called me into the ministry 50 years ago, and today, thank God, I'm on 22 stations across the country, preaching the same glorious gospel, this Pentecostal power. And the letters that I receive, people are being saved and healed and set free by the power of God. And it's amazing, John. And we are today in the throes of a great revival. And I'm glad to be part of that. I'm glad to be part of that. And that's what I loved about Glad Tidings. And today, occasionally, we'll get together and have breakfast or lunch with some of the congregation. Meetings that we had where the presence of God was there and molded those people in the fervence and in the love of God. And that's what I'm praying for today. John, I don't know if you're going to put this in or not, but the greatest problem in the church today is heresy. And to be called a heretic isn't that bad, because heresy itself is a person that's been filled with the fire of God and begun to pull away and replace that with something else that isn't. And that's the reason why the churches are dried up today. And I believe that we are in the last days when Jesus Christ came. In the book of Revelation, he didn't come as a carpenter's son. He came as a terror, the terror of the Messiah. He appeared to John. Out of his mouth was a flaming sword. And his feet were burning with brass. And he was clothed with spiritual. And he spoke to the churches, John. And today this is what he's doing. He's speaking to the churches to be prepared for the rapture of the church. And I'm looking forward to it. Prophecy has been fulfilled. We're in the throes of it right now, John. Glory to God.
And I'll ask this again, might be the same thing you just said. But if you could say something to the congregation for the future, what would it be?
John, I would say, hit the altar. Get your prayer bones back again. Read your word. Get out in the streets and preach the gospel of Jesus Christ. There's power in his name, John. I was going down the street the other day, and I don't know what I did wrong. After all, I am almost 72 years old. And sometimes I make a little slip and spray off. This fellow went by with a blonde, young, nice-looking fellow, and two beautiful girls in the front seat, and they began to curse and swear at me and put their finger up. You know what I'm talking about. So I drove up beside them, and they had their window down. I put my window down. I said, sir, you need Jesus Christ as your Savior. You need to go to church. And all of a sudden, he looked at me, and he put his head down, and both girls did, and they drove away. John, there's power in the name of Jesus. It's a revelation of God through us. And when Christ shines and moves and works through us, people will be convicted because there's power in the name of Jesus. We don't have to defend Jesus. All we do is mention his name, and he'll take care of the rest. It's that simple. And that's what we had at Glad Tidings. John, I don't know if the church ever know it, but I spent hours on my knees before God. I only had a 7th-grade education, and God sent me to Bible school for 3 days. And I knew that I didn't have what I needed to preach to a church as Glad Tidings, educated men and women. I spent hours on my knees before God, and God worked and moved upon that congregation. And he wants to do the same thing today. Praise God.
That's good. Well, we've gone through all the questions.
Okay, John.
What'd you say? I didn't hear you. Oh, yeah, I forgot that. What do you remember about the early days of Costa Mesa? The area of Costa Mesa. What was Costa Mesa like in the early days?
In those days, Costa Mesa wasn't built up like it is today. It was a hard area, a tough area. And Glad Tidings was situated way back off where, hey, it wasn't the best place to build a church. But this is what these early men did. They sacrificed and bought that place. And God began to move. But in the early days, John, there was a hardness. There weren't too many people getting saved. But at the time when we began in Glad Tidings, this large church here, Calvary Chapel, began. And they went out to get the hippies. And their church was based upon the revival that God began to pour out back in 60, 61, and 62. And today the beaches are empty. Because I don't know whether they're afraid or what it is. But there are still God's people that are going out and preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ to them. And so the early days, there wasn't too much of the Pentecostal move of God back in 1960, but God began to move until this day, John. So in those days we had the Harbor Assembly of God Church was doing real well, and Brother Chronic at the First Assembly of God Church on Harbor and 22nd was doing real well. And also our church, there was Brother Tucker, I believe, at Harbor, Brother Chronic, who's passed away and gone to glory, and myself. And we had a wonderful fellowship together, and we worked together. So those days were, I don't know, the fellowship meetings in those days weren't like they are today. It just, there was a fellowship, there was a love. Where is it today? Can it be possible we're going back, as I said, to heresy? People are more interested, like it was in the days of Jesus. Jesus Christ went to the mountain to pray, but the disciples went to their own homes. That's the difference today. There isn't the bond, there isn't the hunger, there isn't the thrill of Pentecost that there should be. But in those days there was. People were hungry. And when God began to move, they yielded to the Spirit of God. John, I'd like to ask you a question. I wish you could answer me. Do we have this in the churches today? I've been traveling all over Southern California. I've seen very little of it. So that was the difference between then and now. But I believe we're in the move today. It's going to move. It started.
Well, great.
Is that it?
And that's going to be a single service, isn't it, at 10, if I remember right?
Yeah, that'll be just like it was at George's thing.
Mm-hmm. Excellent.
Okay. How was it that you first came to be a part of the church?
Well, a lot of people think that the impact of the church on the college didn't really occur until the church came to the college campus. But in my case, I kind of demonstrate the relationship between the college and the church way back in 1960. I came to Costa Mesa to Southern California College in 1960 as a freshman. I had been involved in church before, working with the youth and other things as a high schooler and then as a junior college student. So when I came to Southern California College, I was meeting together with my roommates, and I said, we're in a strange place. We really don't know what churches are in the neighborhood. So let's pray, seek the Lord, and try to decide where God is going to lead us. So we did kind of an unusual thing. We actually prayed, opened up the Bible, just kind of opened it up at random, and read some scripture. And in the scripture, it made a reference to the southeast. So we asked people who were more familiar with the area, is there an Assembly of God church to the southeast? And it turned out that First Assembly of God in Costa Mesa met that direction. So that's the first church that we tried. And M.C. Chronic was the pastor at that time. And we enjoyed the congregation, we enjoyed the church, and they were looking for someone to become the youth director for the youth group. So for 2 years, my freshman and sophomore years at Southern California College, I was a part of the church serving as their minister of youth and had lots of very exciting and dynamic experiences. Then in my junior year, I was on a directed research program where I was actually visiting a variety of different churches of different denominations all over Southern California, and I was making reports about what occurred. Then in my senior year, I had the opportunity to go to Glad Tidings Assembly of God in Newport Beach, where Thomas Benvenuti was the pastor, to go as the assistant pastor. And that turned out to be a really exciting adventure because as an assistant pastor, one of the things that I had the opportunity to do was to bring lots of other friends who were students at Southern California College over to do various things. And so we had a music director that was a student, and we had a Christian education director that was a student, we had a youth director that was a student. And one of the things that I was personally involved in was the Sunday night radio broadcast. And we actually recorded our Sunday night services in the format of a broadcast. We weren't able to do a lot of editing back in those days. So we actually presented it just exactly like it would be going on the air. It wasn't live, it was played later from a tape. But I did that for an entire year, so I still have scripts and excerpts from some of those radio programs and so forth that took place at that time. Well, I did that for my senior year and then graduated and went on to a church in San Bernardino and was several other places after that. And one of the places was at Orange First Assembly of God, where I pastored for 15 years. In the meantime, I went on and got further education, my master's degree and my doctorate degree, and then Southern California College asked me if I would come back as a full-time faculty member on the college campus. So I prayed about it and decided, God releasing me from pastoring in Orange. So I was on my way to Southern California now, these years later, in 1983. And before I got here, Pastor Wood came and talked to me, the district superintendent talked to me, Everett Stenhouse, and also the president of the college talked to me. And they talked about starting a counseling ministry that would minister to the people in the church, the faculty, staff, and dependents at the college, students, and also ministers and missionaries in the district. And they thought that the church, Newport Mesa Christian Center, would be an ideal place for that to take place. So by the time the summer started and the summer ended, when school started, I found myself being a professor at Southern California College, a part-time associate pastor at Newport Mesa Christian Center, and the director of a counseling ministry at the church, the Life Enrichment Center, which had 15 counselors beside myself, and using 5 offices in the church. So as far as church growth is concerned, I feel like the counseling ministry is a very important one, because if people have needs and problems and relationships and in their personal lives, and those needs aren't totally addressed and met in the public worship services, then if they don't solve those problems, it makes it more difficult for them to be a functioning and cooperating, participating part of the overall church life. So by meeting their needs in counseling situations, then they can participate more fully in the church and assist the church growing.
How big was the church, you think, at the first time you went to First Assembly?
Well, when I went to First Assembly Costa Mesa, as I recall, I would say it was probably in the 150 mark. And when I went to Glad Tidings in Newport Beach, I would estimate that it probably was in the neighborhood of 100 people when I first went. And actually, the year that I was in Glad Tidings, the church grew significantly, partly because of the influx of students who became leaders, and then the leadership and the enthusiasm that they had generated a lot of other people coming. And it wasn't really students that were coming as much as the students were leaders, and they were actually providing ministries that ministered to people, and people in the community came. So I personally find it kind of exciting to be able to come back years later and see all of the growth that's taken place in the meantime, and to find Newport Mesa Christian Center in 1983 when I came to be one of the largest churches in the Southern California district, and to see old friends that were in First Assembly of God Costa Mesa when I was there, other old friends from Glad Tidings and Newport Beach, and then many new friends that are here now. So it's a very dynamic environment that is full of resources, has lots of qualified leaders, and a wonderful variety of kinds of people in the congregation. And I think they have a genuine hunger for the things of God. The preaching of the Word has always been a very important part of the congregation since 1983, since I've been here and seen that. And now there seems to be a great burden and compassion for reaching out to the community. And it seems that the next kind of growth that the church is going to experience is not individual growth and family growth and growth within the body of Christ, but they're reaching out and incorporating new members into the body of Christ. And in all 3 churches, if we want to call it that, although they're the same church, missions has always been a high priority. And when I was younger, as a student in Southern California College, I remember many times hearing of the needs of missionaries and feeling God convict my own heart and lay it on my heart to do something to try to help. Now coming back with a specialized ministry of my own, now I find myself in a position where I can not only give and contribute towards it, but actually I myself, as a minister and a leader, on behalf of the church, have a chance to go and minister to missionaries and their families out on the field. and to do marriage enrichment retreats for them, stress management retreats, and other things that can encourage and help them to do a better job in the ministry. And as the church sends out cassette tapes of their messages and blesses those missionaries on kind of a weekly basis, oftentimes a regular basis with all the services of the church, my ministry impacts them at different points in time. Plus, one of the areas of specialization of the counseling that I do is with ministers, missionaries, and their dependents. So it's a special joy to be able to help missionaries and ministers when they're discouraged or when their lives or ministries are interrupted with various types of problems and dilemmas that occur, and to be able to assist them to regain their strength and composure and to work through their problems and to get back into the ministry of serving God and expanding the ministry of the church.
What's the most outstanding memory that you have of the church?
For myself, the thing that highlights my memory is to see lives broken before the Lord around the altars or in small group prayer meetings, and to see people responding positively to God and giving their hearts to the Lord and saying, in essence, Lord, if you can use me, as humble as I am, and sometimes I don't feel totally resourceful, if you can use me, I'm willing to be used. And I've seen various people over the years, and in all three settings, used of the Lord to touch other people's lives, and God honored them. And that's the memory that sticks out. People broken before the Lord and serving God as a consequence of their dedication, and seeing other lives touched as a result of it. And I think that's part of what the church is all about. And this church certainly exhibits that.
Even though you weren't there, do you remember anything about the merger of the two churches? How the Lord worked or anything?
Well, I think the idea of two separate congregations uniting themselves together for a greater purpose. Two churches that had unique ministries of their own and had a comparable size component to they were strong enough to survive on their own, but yet God laid it upon their heart that if the two would join forces together, that they could increase their numbers and increase the magnitude of their outreach and their influence, and that they would have the potential of building an even stronger ministry that could touch even more lives. Now, for people to be willing to cooperate like that, I think is a rare and unique feature and characteristic, and to observe that happening, and then to see them go through the stages of cooperation and growth, moving to a new location on the campus and using a facility which wasn't their own, that was unique and different, and then to see a piece of ground begin to develop and to watch a building grow. And then once the building was finished, to see their cooperative effort with Southern California College, so that the buildings are not like some churches might be, where they're just used on Sunday morning, Sunday night, and then another day during the week, but to literally see the facilities used 7 days a week, and I mean morning, afternoon, and night, and I'm one of the persons that's sometimes coming through at 6 o'clock in the morning and leaving at 9 or 10 o'clock at night, and seeing people being ministered to by the church and ministering in the church in a variety of different capacities really makes an impression. I mean, it shows that the church is not here just to be served, but it's here to make a difference in the world.
What do you suppose would be the cause of the growth in the church?
I think that the primary growth that's going to be taking place in the future is not going to be based upon people just hearing about the church and saying, I think I'll go there and try it. But I think it's going to be because people who are already going to the church are going out on the highways and the byways and compelling people to come in, inviting people, encouraging people, so enthused themselves about what the church and the ministry of the church has done for them that they would like other people to be touched with this ministry too. Because it's not a self-serving ministry that brings glory and honor to the church really, but it's a kind of ministry that edifies and builds up the people that are in the church.
What do you remember about Costa Mesa in the early days?
My first impressions of Costa Mesa as a city was one of agricultural bean fields, lots of open space, lots of open land, not very many people. A World War II military base, which the church is on now and the college is on now, and the fairgrounds and Orange Coast College in those areas. And my thought is that if a person was looking then, they would probably have no idea of how things are going to be now, almost 30 years later, from my view. And it took a real vision to project what the church should be like in the future. And I'm happy to say, as one observer and a participant, that the church had a vision. And because the church had a vision, it was willing to change as the city changed and as the area changed. So that now, in 1989, it's prepared to minister to the volume of people, the mobility of people, the variety of people that now exists in this city and in this county.
If you could name somebody, if you could think of somebody that came out of one of the two churches or Newport Mesa or something that has really been making a difference in the world today, or in Christendom.
I think, really, that this church is so talented with so many outstanding people because it draws from two reservoirs of histories of two different churches, as well as from a faculty and staff of leaders at Southern California College, that I would do a disservice to single out a single individual when in reality probably hundreds of various individuals have made very significant marks in the ministry and service of our Lord, who have received their call, their inspiration, or some of their equipping through the ministries of Newport Mesa Christian Center.
If you had something to say to the congregation for the future, what would it be?
Well, my inclination would be to keep up the good work, that you have a beautiful heritage upon which to build a future, and keep your eyes on the whole world, and not just the distant world, but the immediate world also. Be open to the Lord, have a broken and a contrite heart and spirit, and be responsive to let the Lord use you like He would like to use you. And the church is going to continue touching an ever-increasing circle of people.
Anything else you'd like to say?
No, I tried to say most of it. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
I went fast because you had to write down.
That's the enemy.
That's the enemy.
For one home video camera.
That's the abomination that maketh desolate.
We have found the enemy and it is us. Huh?
Yeah, there you go. It seems like life, the pace of our life has in 20 years has gone from fast to desperate. You know, it just seemed like things were a lot simpler in those days. You had to make do with a lot more. The college was operating on a far simpler basis. The issues were simpler, whether we survived the next year or not. That was the issue. The church was very simple.
Well, what year did you first come approximately to
California,
the church?
1970.
1970.
Yeah, we came to California in '69, and I started at SCC in '69, and we came to the church the following year. I taught Sunday school for a year over at Christ Church in Westminster when Floyd Westbrook was pastoring over there. Do you remember Floyd? And then felt like that wasn't quite our cup of tea, and so came to Costa Mesa and looked at Tom's church and looked at Chronic's church. And there are a couple of things that made us go with Chronic, and that one was that we felt like he needed help more, younger people. We were in our early 30s at the time. She was in her late 20s, I guess. And he had a lot of old people in the church, and we felt like they needed help. And the other thing was I had a hard time with Tom's preaching. You know, it wasn't that. You were at Newport Christian Center at the time, right? When it was Old Glad Tidings. And you know, there wasn't a great deal of substance there, and a lot of noise and emotion.
Just
and
gets edited from the tape, right?
I had a little trouble with that. Yeah. You're not taping, are you?
Yeah.
You are?
Yeah, but that's okay, because all we do, we just cut and choose.
Well, I had no idea you were. Good night.
I knew you did, or you wouldn't be saying this.
Well, it'd be kind of nice if we told us that.
Well, a lot of times, we have found on these interviews that we get more relaxed and animated.
You got it relaxed.
Good.
Oh, listen, we're
Good
used to this sort of thing. You know,
We do, we'll tell you.
yeah, well, we're used to it. I've been on television, I mean broadcast television, a number of times, and
Yeah, well,
radio
we had you
many,
here
many
on
times,
images,
so.
too.
What?
We had you here on images.
Yeah, yeah. But I've been on, you know, paid TV a number of times. So, we're not uptight about, why don't you start that whole thing over again then?
Oh, he's just going to
It's a
cut.
learning one, anyway.
You're gonna edit it?
Yeah.
Are you? Honest?
See, we're gonna have 4 to 5 hours of interviews, and so we cut down to 15 minutes.
Yeah, okay.
Believe me, he won't leave that in.
So all we're going to do, you see, is just take and go, we're gonna tell a story with different people. Just go right through it.
Okay. Well, I would have let her do some answering if I thought you were taping. Go ahead.
Go on, I'm not saying anything.
What, how big do you think the church was at the time you came to First Assembly?
I have no idea.
Somewhere between, at First Assembly was about 80 to 100 people, I think, somewhere in that vicinity. And a large number of them came from Bethel Towers, which was a great ministry, but which, you know, it didn't supply the kind of financial base that the church really needed. It really needed a younger core of people that were bringing in money to be able to carry on that kind of a ministry. At that period, it was hurting pretty badly.
What kind of activities were going on there that you can remember that attracted you to the church?
Linda liked the Sunday school class. That was, at that time, that was about our basis for choosing a church.
Activities. Golly, John, that was 19 years ago. I'm not sure I have anything to add to that one either.
And your reason for going to this church as to opposed to other churches?
Basically ministry. I felt like I wanted to be in a place where I could be helpful, and Pastor Chronic needed help, and we felt like as two young people, relatively young, we could supply something that was helpful in two ways, by tithing and offerings to help in the financial base of the church, and then also to, we got involved in teaching Sunday school right away, and I think there was a while that I sang in the choir, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So I sang in the choir for a while, and we were quite involved when the church it was at that point.
Did the church have any kind of a missions program, or do you remember any missions things going on?
I don't remember anything except for the Bethel Towers ministry. That was a very, very important part of Pastor Cronick's work, because he felt like that he had a definite ministry to the Bethel Towers, and that has always been a part, I think, of Newport Mesa. It's continued to be that ever since that time.
They had some foreign missions.
There was some
support.
foreign missions. I don't think, though, that it was very heavy, because we had a heavy building payment and a small population in the church and a small economic base.
What's your favorite memory of the church at that period of time?
Favorite or cutest?
Whatever.
This is when George Wood used to blush when Gina would flirt with him.
On the podium.
Yeah, right. And of course, you have to remember that Gina is Fred Pettit's puppet. So to see George react to a puppet.
Of course, George would blush all the way back to wherever
The hair stopped.
wherever the hair thinned to. So.
He did it every time.
And what was your involvement in that church at that time?
What, Costa Mesa?
Yeah.
Sunday school teacher, I guess. For a while, I guess I was Sunday school superintendent. I mean, you name it.
And then you became George's secretary for 7 years.
Yeah. That was after the merger, though.
After the merger, yeah. But they're asking, do we remember the trailers? I mean, this is well before the trailers, you were George's secretary.
What do you think brought about the merger, the First Assembly of Newport Christian Center?
I think it's just basically a matter of economics. You had two struggling churches trying to make a go of it in one area. It was a very logical move in my mind. One had a building, the other had a large congregation, or a congregation too large for its building. The other one had a large building that was too large for its congregation. And it was just a logical marriage, I thought. It wouldn't have made sense to have continued the way that they were going. The one would have had to build, and the other one probably would have hit some very hard times financially.
Do you remember that first day of the two merger and the first Sunday? Anything about that?
We were not there that week. We hadn't, for some reason or other, we had left for a little bit or something.
Yeah, but, yeah.
So we weren't actually attending for about 6 months or so. Or you were doing a series.
We were doing
that's-
some things, and I did some
Yeah.
things for the Garden Grove Church.
You
when
were doing
Dwight
a
Brown
series and so forth, that's what it was. So we weren't there.
pastoring there, and some other things like that, and so we weren't there at that point. We came back after that was over.
And after the merger is when you was the secretary.
Yeah, almost. When, what was his name? Your minister of music left.
Dale,
No, not Dale. the wife was the secretary. You know who I mean.
Starts with-
Starts with a B, right?
Nichols.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Okay. So I took over from what, Judy? So that's one. And I think they left pretty soon right after the merger there, didn't they?
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure either, but it was fairly shortly right after that.
And how many secretaries did we have at that time?
Oh, no. One. With many hats.
He asked that in all innocence, as if he didn't know.
Yeah, so he didn't know.
And what, was it a lot of work at that time, to just being the only secretary? What transpired in a day's time?
Everything. You're a part-time custodian if you ran out of toilet paper. Part-time gardener if the weeds need to be pulled.
Run
You
the
never-
mail over, and
Yeah, just everything. Because you had,
she got a lot of errand running to do.
we had about, what, 4, 5 pastors? I've lost track at that time. So, yes, never a dull moment.
What do you suppose was the cause for the growth of Newport Mesa?
I don't know what the cause was, but I know one cause was certainly George's good preaching. George is probably one of the finest expository preachers in the Assemblies of God. And the preaching of the Word it's always been my conviction that where there's the real preaching of the Word with real content and substance, that churches will grow. And I think George has really demonstrated that beautifully. The church has grown enormously.
If you could say one thing to the congregation for the future, what would you like to tell the congregation for the future?
I think probably my concern would be to remember the fact that the church's roots lie in ministry to some very, very humble people. And that now that we've become a rather wealthy middle-class church, that we shouldn't forget those people. And we shouldn't ever become a place where a poor person can't attend because he feels like somehow he's out of place. It would concern me greatly if we ever reached that point.
Do you remember meeting in the trailers in the chapel?
Oh, yeah, sure.
What do you remember about that area?
Well, I was no longer secretary. I left right as we were starting to pack up to move over. So it was nice just to be able to go to church without any responsibility.
And of course, as a faculty member of the college, I attended that chapel regularly, so my memories aren't very clear of the chapel either because they blur a little bit into SCC at that point. It wasn't the remarkable experience for me that it probably was for other people that, came from the church. And because the chapel being constructed the way it is in a kind of an open beam ceiling, almost a camp meeting sort of building, I think a lot of people found that a really kind of a unique stage in the growth of the church. But when you normally attend it several times a week, why it kind of blurs a little bit and becomes a little less distinctive.
What do you remember about the early days of Costa Mesa?
The early days of Costa Mesa are before our time.
We've only been here 20 years, John.
When you first come, what was Costa Mesa like?
It was a simpler town. A lot of the things that complicate your lives, like swap meets in the fairgrounds and rock concerts in the auditorium over here, weren't there. The traffic that goes along with things like that wasn't there. The freeway wasn't there. I drove down to the college on Bristol and Newport Boulevard. They opened the freeway shortly after I got I got here. When I said I drove to to Costa Mesa, that's from Santa Ana. So the freeway opened somewhere at about that time, around 69 and or 70, and we thought that was terrific because there was very little congestion on it, and now it's so terribly congested you can hardly get off it sometimes. It was a lot simpler in the sense that you could get in your car and drive somewhere without making a major project out of it and having to plan it in terms of traffic flow ahead of time.
The city hall and the police station weren't right here.
Where was City Hall?
No, but it wasn't next to the college. That went up 10, 15 years ago,
What's City Hall?
City Hall.
Down on Bay Street.
Oh, was it? I didn't know that.
The building's still there, little gray building. Must be true.
I didn't know where they were, but I knew they weren't here.
Well, no, what year did that go up then?
Grace sold that property.
Another year.
Or
No,
no,
he
Valier.
didn't. No, he didn't. No, he didn't.
Valier.
Budge, I think, sold it.
Pardon?
Budge, sold it to the city.
Budge? Oh,
Yeah, that was up
Okay.
when we came. City Hall was up.
was it?
I don't know when it went up.
There's been nothing built over there since I've been here that I'm aware of.
Curiosity, we'll have to check it out. I said that curiosity, we'll have to check it out.
The only thing that's gone up is the AC building, but that went up in '75 on the college. But the City Hall was up long before then, and long before I got here. You just didn't notice it because the campus was oriented down the other end of the lot. And what is now would be bisected by Newport Boulevard.
Maybe.
You started sign language, and how did sign language classes and interpretation get started here?
Basically, we had a need for it, so we started it. There had already been some sign language classes held through the church. And at the time when we had Renee who needed an interpreter, and so we started signing up in the balcony of the Costa Mesa church, the old church. And we're still here. Only now we're down the front seats. We progressed from the balcony to the front.
Is there anything else that you'd like to say?
About the church?
Yeah, about the church. Maybe I haven't asked.
Anything exciting, huh?
No, I don't think so. Not that I can think of. I think John Huntley deserves a raise in pay.
What about the Love Feast? Do you remember the Love Feasts? Over in 22nd Street?
No, I don't remember them. No.
What
Were
were
they
they?
potlucks?
There were potlucks on Wednesday nights before the service.
Oh, well, I remember us having them, but we never went on Wednesday nights.
It's awfully hard when you've got lectures to prepare for the next day, to tell the students that you were in church instead of preparing your lecture and you don't have one. So midweek is awfully hard for us to make it out. We went to a few, but we don't remember them real well for that reason.
It took a while to even remember. Oh, yeah.
We're good.
You sure you don't want to do that first part all over again?
Oh, no, we got it.
Well, that was
I think
kind of
you're-
unfair.
Well, we'd like to have John Huntley tell of his first days with how he started the audiovisual.
Understand.
We're going to have about 4 or 5 hours of interviews.
Okay, that's a lot of
Uh,
time.
Cutting this down to 15 minutes.
Oh, good.
That's good.
You might be able to find a couple of good minutes. Or one. 30 seconds.
And just some regular questions,
Your routine stuff, okay.
such as, when was it that you first come to the church?
That's a good question. I got to think about that one a little bit. See, must have been in probably 51 or so, 1951, if we first started attending and helping a little bit in the church at that time. With
He
when
was still
Dan
in college
I
at
was
the
in college,
time.
yeah. When Dan Pacoda was pastoring, I believe, at that time when I started.
And this was down on the block?
Yeah, well, it was down on the beachfront, right, in the storefront.
What do you remember about the church at that time?
Full of young people, vibrant young people. And I considered myself young then myself, except that they were even younger.
They were beach bums, I guess you could call them. They were just children off the streets that Dan and Harlan and others had corralled. Most of them were just down right off the beach, and their families, some of the families were kind of horror stories, actually.
Right.
Children of alcoholics, of women of mothers that were not motherly,
Right.
and
Mm-hmm.
different cases like that.
Very true.
What do you remember about Costa Mesa and
Well, it was small compared to today, and it was in its beginnings, and a few years, a year or two later, when we started following Dan Pacoda and Esther and pastoring the church, which was, 1953, I think, and 54, we struggled to begin buying a small house. We were working full-time, both of us, and also pastoring the little mission. And it was a struggle, but houses were cheap compared to today. We had a nice house a reasonably nice house on Federal Avenue. We bought it for $7,000.
And it was 3-bedroom. Irvine was still Irvine Ranch then, with buffaloes down in the canyon, and
That's right.
nothing built there, period.
How big was the church at that time?
Just in its really infancy. It was, I would say there was probably, would you say, 6 or so adults at the most.
Maybe more, because we had different
That's true.
friends helping at different
College
times.
friends that were helping.
But adults from the community, I guess you would say 6, all right.
Right. And then there was a lot of
50,
young,
would you say?
maybe in the range of anywhere from, varied I'm sure, between 30 to 50 I would suppose. A lot of young people. Thursday, was it Thursday or Wednesday? I think Thursday night we had a gathering with the young people for fun and devotions out at one of the barracks at the college here, and they ran us ragged, but we had a meaningful relationship with them.
Was there any special thrust for evangelism or missions or anything during those days?
Yes, we organized the young people frequently to go out and go door to door. Did that frequently, and trying to gender more young people and people to come to our Sunday school.
As poor as things were at the church, we did support Wayne and Doris Turnbull, I remember at
That's
the
right,
time.
as missionaries. Hmm.
I don't remember how much.
I don't remember either, but I know we did.
Maybe $15 a month, something like that.
Well, let's see. If you could say one thing to the congregation today for the future, what would you say to the congregation for the future?
I would probably have to say that make yourselves available to God. Probably that's the most important thing a Christian can do, is to become available to Him. And it doesn't really matter how important in the eyes of people your function is in the church or God's kingdom. It's how dedicated and available you make yourself to Him, and He knows best how to use you and your talents. And then stretch a little bit, like Pastor Wood said.
What's your favorite memory of the church you
Memory? Boy. I guess knowing that God was in our lives and in the church and guiding, taking care of us.
And who do you know that was saved or came from the church that's making a difference in the world?
Well, the first primary person that comes to mind is Ray White, obviously. It's just wonderful to see what God has done there.
Did he come to the Lord during your pastorate?
You were his Sunday school teacher.
Yeah, I was his
over-
Sunday school teacher during that time frame, and I would expect I had some contributing factor. But Pastor Pacoda was the pastor at that time.
He had a very great influence on the young people.
Absolutely.
He was extremely good with them.
Right. And it's inspiring to see God can do those things.
Mhm.
Anything else you'd like to say?
Just keep serving Him. There's no better calling than to serve God. And we can serve Him wherever we are. And we just enjoyed being a part of this time with your church.
Yes, it was a beautiful day.
Had a lovely time. God bless you all.
Thank you.